The impossible incident. The crystalline halls of the Galactic Council station hummed with an energy that bordered on panic. Ambassador Thexera of the Velmoran sovereignty clicked her mandibles nervously as she watched the emergency session convene. In her 4 centuries of diplomatic service, she had never seen the council end with such urgency. Order. I demand order. High Chancellor Vasik's 3 voices rang out in perfect harmony, silencing the chamber. The ancient chromalite's skin flickered through shades of distressed purple. We face an unprecedented crisis. A human vessel has violated 17 galactic regulations, broken 3 supposed laws of physics, and somehow saved 14 colony worlds in the process. Thexera leaned forward. Humans. Of course it was humans. The newest council species had been members for barely 2 standard years, yet they had already generated more incident reports than the previous century combined. Bring forth the accused, Vasik commanded. The chamber doors dissolved, revealing a human female flanked by 2 enforcement caste guards. She stood perhaps 1.7 meters tall, with dark skin and hair bound in intricate patterns. Her uniform bore scorch marks and what appeared to be hastily applied repair patches. Most remarkably, she was smiling. Captain Zara Okonkwo of the transport vessel Wandering Star, the human announced cheerfully as if attending a social gathering rather than a galactic tribunal. Happy to be here, counselors. Though I've got a cargo of Belizean fruit that's going to overripen if this takes too long. A scandalized murmur rippled through the assembly. Captain Okonkwo, Vasik began, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration. Do you understand the severity of the charges against you? The list was pretty long, Zara admitted, rocking slightly on her heels. I skimmed it. Something about unauthorized warp signatures, prohibited navigation routes, and improper emergency protocols. You destroyed a registered navigation beacon. Well, yes, but it was giving incorrect coordinates that would have sent ships into the Calrose asteroid field. Seemed like the sensible thing to do. Thexera watched Councillor Primax of the technocracy nearly vibrate out of his seat. Sensible? Sensible? That beacon was a Class 7 navigation aid. It cost 17 million credits and took 3 years to construct. Right, but it was going to kill people, Zara said, her tone maddeningly reasonable. So I shot it. Then I rigged up a replacement using my ship's secondary transmitter and some parts from our entertainment system. It's not as pretty, but it works. You're welcome, by the way. The council chamber erupted. Representatives shouted in a dozen languages, their translation implants struggling to keep pace. Thexera found herself caught between professional horror and something uncomfortably close to admiration. Vasik's voices rose in a harmonic screech that demanded silence. You cannot simply decide that expensive council infrastructure is malfunctioning and destroy it. But it was malfunctioning, Zara protested. I ran 3 diagnostic checks before I fired. The beacon was broadcasting coordinates that were off by 42 degrees. Did none of you notice that 12 ships had vanished in that sector over the past month? An uncomfortable silence fell. Thexera accessed her data tablet quickly. The human was correct. 12 ships missing, all in that sector. How had nobody connected those incidents to the beacon? That information was under investigation, Councillor Zephyrim of the Analytical Collective said stiffly. A proper committee had been formed. We would have issued a recommendation within 6 to 8 standard months. Zara's eyes widened. 6 to 8 months? How many more ships would have disappeared in that time? That is irrelevant. There are procedures, Captain Okonkwo. Procedures exist for a reason. Yeah, but not good reasons if they let people die while you're filling out forms. Thexera watched the human's expression, open, earnest, genuinely confused by the council's outrage. It occurred to her that this wasn't defiance. Zara Okonkwo truly could not comprehend why saving lives would be controversial. This human displays textbook symptoms of regulation deficiency syndrome, declared Dr. Moltes, the council's chief psychologist. His feathers ruffled with clinical certainty. An inability to respect established protocols, excessive individualism, and dangerous problem-solving initiative. I recommend immediate remedial training. There's a syndrome for using common sense? Zara asked, tilting her head. Is that a joke? Are you guys pranking me? Because I've heard Belizean humor can be pretty weird. Vasik's skin now cycled through shades that Thexera's translator labeled as incandescent rage combined with bewildered exhaustion. Captain Okonkwo, the High Chancellor said slowly, you will remain in custody while this council determines appropriate sanctions. Session adjourned until morning cycle. As guards escorted the still confused human away, Thexera made a decision. She had to understand these creatures who treated galactic law like optional suggestions. Perhaps that understanding might save the council from itself. The pattern emerges. Thexera spent the night cycle reviewing human incident reports, and what she discovered left her thoroughly disturbed. Captain Okonkwo was not an anomaly. She was representative. The morning session opened with Prosecutor Velmon presenting his case with the zealous precision his species was famous for. The Juridian's 6 eyes tracked multiple data streams simultaneously as he projected evidence into the chamber's holographic display. Observe, esteemed counselors. 6 months ago, the human merchant vessel Frontier Spirit encountered a medical emergency on the mining station Kepler 438b. Station protocol required contacting the nearest medical facility and waiting for certified responders. Estimated arrival time, 4 hours. The human captain, one Marcus Reeves, instead performed emergency surgery using mining equipment, a furniture fabricator, and instructional videos from Earth's historical database. Did the patient survive? Thexera found herself asking. Velmon's eyes converged on her with obvious irritation. That is not the point, Ambassador. The patient did survive, but the human violated 43 health and safety regulations. He used non-medical equipment in a medical procedure. Because the medical equipment was 4 hours away and the patient had maybe 20 minutes, a new voice called out. Thexera turned to see another human entering the observer's gallery, a tall male with silver-streaked hair and the bearing of someone who had spent decades in space. His badge identified him as Admiral Kwame Adeyemi, the Human Council representative. Admiral, you are out of order, Vosik warned. With respect, High Chancellor, this entire proceeding is out of order. Kwame's voice carried the weight of authority. You're prosecuting people for saving lives. Do you hear how that sounds? We are prosecuting people for chaos. Counselor Primax shot back. Your species has been council members for 23 standard months. In that time, you have generated 7,412 incident reports. 7,000. The Velmoran sovereignty has generated 38 in the past century. Thexera felt her mandibles twitch uncomfortably at being used as the example. Maybe you're measuring the wrong things, Kwame suggested. How many lives have those 7,000 incidents saved? Saved lives do not excuse procedural violations, Velmon interjected. Civilization requires order. Your species demonstrates a pathological inability to follow established guidelines. Show them the Tarsus station recording, Kwame said quietly. Incident Report 3847. The holographic display shifted, showing a human woman in engineering coveralls standing in what appeared to be a power plant. Warning klaxons blared, and the timestamp indicated the recording was 3 months old. This is Chief Engineer Diana Castellanos. The recording began, the human speaking rapidly while her hands moved across control panels. The reactor containment is failing. Station AI says the only solution is emergency core jettison, which will kill power to life support for 40,000 people. AI calculates 93% casualty rate. I'm going to try something else. What followed made even Thexera's trained engineering mind spin. The human began rerouting power through systems never designed for such loads, bypassing safety interlocks, and creating a cascade of improvised solutions that should have resulted in catastrophic failure. Instead, the reactor stabilized. 40,000 lives saved. This human, Velmon declared, violated every engineering protocol in Council database. She should have followed the AI recommendation. The AI recommendation would have killed 37,000 people, Kwame said flatly. The AI calculated that as acceptable losses given the circumstances. Well, humans don't really do acceptable losses, Kwame replied. We find that phrase morally repugnant. The chamber buzzed with translation confusion. Several species didn't have words for the concept Kwame was expressing. Thexera pulled up more records, her compound eyes scanning rapidly. The pattern was undeniable. Humans appeared constitutionally incapable of accepting that some deaths were simply inevitable or procedurally necessary. When faced with a choice between following protocols and saving lives, they chose lives. Every single time. Perhaps, she ventured carefully, we should consider that human approach to crisis management, while unorthodox, has demonstrated remarkable effectiveness? Remarkable chaos. Primax corrected. Ambassador Thexera, the Council has maintained galactic order for 12,000 years precisely because we follow established procedures. We cannot allow one species to simply ignore regulations whenever they feel like it. But we don't ignore them whenever we feel like it, Zara interjected from her holding area. We ignore them when people are dying and the regulations are getting in the way of helping. There's a difference. The regulations exist to prevent deaths. Velmon insisted. Then why do you guys keep almost letting people die while you follow them? Zara asked, genuinely puzzled. It was, Thexera realized, the central question. And nobody in the chamber seemed to have a satisfactory answer. Common sense on trial. The third day of proceedings began with what Prosecutor Velmon clearly believed would be his crushing blow. The holographic display illuminated, showing the human colony ship Perseverance approaching a planet designated as New Harmony. This incident, Velmon announced with grim satisfaction, represents perhaps the most egregious example of human disregard for Council authority. Captain Jinsu Park was ordered to delay colonization of New Harmony pending completion of a comprehensive environmental survey. Estimated completion time, 18 months. Captain Park's response was to ignore the order entirely. The recording showed a middle-aged human male with weathered features and calm eyes sitting in a captain's chair. Council command, this is Captain Park. I understand your directive, but I'm going to have to respectfully decline. We have 6,000 colonists in cryosleep, our ship's life support is operating at 60% capacity, and we've already delayed 3 months due to your survey extensions. We're landing. Park out. He just refused? Counselor Zephyrim sounded genuinely shocked. A direct order from Council command? He did, Velmon confirmed. And in doing so he potentially exposed 6,000 humans to unknown pathogens, dangerous fauna and environmental hazards. This is precisely the recklessness we must address. Admiral Kwame stood. May I present a counter-perspective, High Chancellor? Vosik's skin rippled with resigned colors. Proceed. Captain Park sent me his reasoning before landing. I'd like to share it. Kwame activated his own data display. The colony ship Perseverance was designed for a maximum journey of 4 years. It had already been in space for 6. Life support failures were cascading. Medical supplies were critically low. 3 colonists had already died from complications that could have been treated with planet-side facilities. And the environmental survey? Velmon demanded. The potential dangers? Captain Park conducted his own survey using the ship's instruments. He found the planet had Earth-compatible biosphere markers, breathable atmosphere, and no signs of megafauna or technological civilization. Was his equipment as sophisticated as a Council survey team's? No. But it was sufficient to make an informed decision. Informed? He couldn't possibly have checked for microorganisms, subtle atmospheric toxins, or long-term exposure effects. You're right, Kwame agreed. He couldn't. So he landed a small advanced team first. They spent 2 weeks running every test they could. Only after confirming safety did they wake the colonists. Meanwhile, your survey team was still filling out requisition forms for transport. Thexera watched Zara nodding enthusiastically from her holding area. The young captain seemed to find nothing unusual about Park's actions. This is insanity, Dr. Moltes interjected. What Captain Park displayed was textbook crisis decision pathology. Unable to accept uncertainty, he imposed his own judgment over that of established authorities. Or, countered Kwame, he evaluated the risks, determined that waiting 18 months for a slightly more thorough survey posed greater danger than proceeding with reasonable caution, and acted accordingly. That's not pathology. That's leadership. It's also illegal, Velmon said firmly. The law exists without exception. Otherwise we have chaos. Thexera accessed her tablet, pulling up records from the colony. New Harmony is now home to 6,000 healthy humans. Agricultural yields exceed projections. Medical reports show no unusual pathologies. By what metric was Captain Park's decision wrong? By the metric of law, Ambassador. Primax's synthetic voice rose to an almost hysterical pitch. If we allow outcomes to justify violations, we invite anarchy. Perhaps, a new voice interjected, quiet but commanding, we should consider whether our laws are serving their intended purpose. The speaker was Counselor Threnanael of the Wisdom Collective, one of the eldest members of the Council. Her species lived for millennia, and she had served for 6 centuries. When she spoke, even the loudest voices quieted. I have observed this pattern across human incidents, Threnanael continued. They violate our protocols, yes. But always, and I emphasize always, in service of preserving life. Never for personal gain. Never from malice. Always from what they term common sense. Common sense is not a legal framework. Velmon protested. No, but perhaps it should inform one, Threnanael said gently. Our regulations have grown over millennia, layer upon layer, until we have achieved something remarkable. A legal system so comprehensive that it occasionally prevents us from doing what is obviously right. The chamber fell silent. Thexera felt her respiratory systems quicken. A wisdom collective counselor questioning the fundamental structure of council law was unprecedented. With respect, Counselor Threnino, Vasek said carefully, are you suggesting we simply discard 12,000 years of legal development? I'm suggesting, Threnino replied, that we examine why a species barely 2 years into council membership has saved more lives than our emergency services saved in the past decade, and ask ourselves uncomfortable questions about what that means. Zara raised her hand from the holding area, like a student in a classroom. Can I say something? You are the defendant, Captain Okonkwo. You may speak. I think I understand the confusion, Zara said. You guys have rules for everything, right? And the rules are supposed to keep people safe. But somewhere along the way, following the rules became more important than the people the rules were supposed to protect. That's not civilization. That's just bureaucracy. And you believe you can differentiate between the two? Velmon asked acidly. Yeah, Zara said simply. When following the rule will get someone killed, it's bureaucracy. When breaking the rule will get someone killed, it's civilization. It's really not that complicated. Dr. Moldus laughed, a harsh sound. The arrogance, to suggest that galactic governance can be reduced to such simplistic formulations. Is it arrogant if it's true? Thexera heard herself asking. All eyes turned to her. She felt her mandibles twitch nervously but pressed on. I have reviewed hundreds of human incident reports. In every case they broke our rules to save lives. In every case our rules would have resulted in preventable deaths. If our legal framework consistently produces outcomes we would consider morally abhorrent, does that not suggest a flaw in the framework itself? The chamber erupted into argument. As voices rose and translation implants strained, Thexera caught Zara's eye. The human smiled, not smugly but with genuine warmth, and Thexera found herself returning the gesture in her own species' way. Perhaps these humans weren't crazy after all. Perhaps they were the only sane ones in the room. The human problem. The fourth day of proceedings took an unexpected turn when Counselor Zephyrim of the Analytical Collective requested permission to present what he termed a comprehensive analysis of the human problem. Granted, Vasek said, though his skin color suggested wariness. Zephyrim's species processed information through quantum-linked neural networks, making them the Council's premier researchers and analysts. When he spoke, it was with the weight of pure data. I have analyzed all 7,412 human incident reports, he began. I have also analyzed the circumstances that prompted each incident, and I have reached a conclusion that I find troubling. The holographic display filled with cascading data streams, statistical models, and probability matrices that made even Thexera's compound eyes ache. In 98.7% of cases where humans violated council protocols, adhering to said protocols would have resulted in loss of life, critical infrastructure damage, or other catastrophic outcomes. In 1.1% of cases, the outcome would have been neutral. In 0.2% of cases, following protocol would have produced a marginally better result. Silence fell across the chamber. That's impossible, Primax finally said. You're suggesting our protocols are 98% counterproductive? No, Zephyrim corrected. I'm suggesting our protocols are optimized for different variables than humans prioritize. We optimize for order, predictability, and institutional preservation. Humans optimize for immediate survival outcomes. So they're reckless, Velmon interjected. Actually, no. Further analysis reveals that human decision-making in crisis situations demonstrates sophisticated risk assessment. They simply weight variables differently than we do. For instance, he pulled up a specific incident. When engineer Rajesh Malhotra bypassed 17 safety interlocks to prevent a station collision, he did not act recklessly. He calculated that the risk of containment failure from his actions was approximately 15%, while the certainty of collision was 100%. 15% is an unacceptable risk. Primax protested. Compared to 100%? Admiral Kwame asked dryly. The regulations exist to prevent anyone from having to make such choices. But someone was going to have to make a choice, Zara called out. The station was going to collide. That wasn't optional. Rajesh chose 15% risk over certain death. How is that wrong? Dr. Moltes stood abruptly. I have prepared a psychological profile of human cognition that I believe will clarify the situation. His feathers ruffled importantly. Humans suffer from what we term action bias, a pathological need to do something, anything even when inaction would be preferable. They cannot accept that sometimes the best choice is to follow established procedures and accept the outcome. Even when the outcome is people dying? Thexera asked. Yes. Because it is the procedurally correct outcome. Civilization cannot function if every individual believes they know better than established institutions. But what if they do? The question came from Counselor Threnanael. What if, in specific crisis scenarios, an individual on the ground does possess better judgment than distant institutions? Impossible. Moltes declared. Institutions have accumulated wisdom, resources, expert analysis. And response time measured in hours or days, Kwame interrupted. While crises unfold in minutes. Tell me, Doctor, how many of your expert analyses have saved lives in the 60 seconds available before a reactor melts down? That is why we have automated systems and trained responders, who are also trained to follow your protocols, Kwame said. Which means when the protocol is wrong, everybody dies while waiting for authorization to save themselves. Thexera pulled up another data point that had caught her attention. Counselors, I would like to introduce additional context. In the past 23 months since humans joined the Council, overall mortality rates in sectors with human presence have decreased by 37%. The chamber went silent. That's not possible, Primax said weakly. The data is verified, Zephyrim confirmed. Human presence correlates with dramatically improved survival outcomes across all species. Emergency response times have decreased. Crisis resolution success rates have increased. Infrastructure failure cascades have been interrupted more frequently. Because they keep breaking things. Velmon protested. They interrupt processes. They interrupt failures, Threnanael corrected gently. Perhaps we have become so focused on maintaining our systems that we failed to notice how often our systems fail. Vasik's skin cycled through colors that Thexera had never seen before, confusion, concern, and something that might have been shame. Are you suggesting, the High Chancellor said slowly, that the Council has been wrong? I'm suggesting, Threnanael replied, that we have optimized for the wrong outcomes. We have created a civilization that is very good at following rules and very bad at handling exceptions. Humans, conversely, seem to specialize in exceptions. That's actually a really good way to put it, Zara said appreciatively. We're basically your emergency backup common sense. You guys are great at the normal, everyday stuff. When things go sideways though, you kind of freeze up. We do not freeze up. Primax objected. We follow proper emergency protocols, which take too long and don't account for weird circumstances, Zara countered. Look, I'm not saying your way is wrong for most situations. I'm saying that sometimes, when the asteroid is about to hit or the reactor is melting down or the beacon is pointing people into a death trap, sometimes you need someone who's willing to shoot first and fill out the paperwork later. That is anarchy, Velmon said, but his conviction seemed to be wavering. No, Admiral Kwame said firmly. That's survival. You've been playing Civilization on easy mode for so long you forgot what it looks like when everything goes wrong. Humans come from a world that regularly tried to kill us. We learned to improvise or die. You created a society so safe and regulated that you forgot how to handle actual danger. Thexera felt something clicking into place in her mind. We've had 12,000 years of relative peace. 12,000 years to build layer upon layer of regulations, each designed to prevent a specific past failure. But we've created a system so rigid that it cannot bend without breaking. And humans, Threnanael added, come from a world that never stopped breaking them. They learned to bend instead. The chamber fell into contemplative silence. Even Velmon seemed at a loss for words. Finally Vasik spoke. This council will recess for one full cycle while we consider these matters. Captain Okonkwo, you will remain in custody but... He paused, his skin color shifting to something almost like amusement. Comfortable custody. You have given us much to think about. As the session adjourned, Thexera noticed something remarkable. Where before the council members had looked at Zara with irritation or confusion, now there was something else in their eyes. It might have been respect. The breaking point. The fifth day began with unexpected news. During the recess, 3 separate emergency situations had occurred across council space. Thexera received the briefing from her aide, and the information left her mandibles clicking with anxiety. All 3 resolved successfully? She asked. Yes, Ambassador. In each case, humans on-site violated protocols to implement immediate solutions. And in each case, her aide hesitated, Council responders arrived later and confirmed that following standard protocols would have failed. When the session reconvened, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Even Prosecutor Velmon seemed subdued as he presented the morning's evidence. "I intended to present further charges against Captain Okonkwo," he began. "However, events of the past cycle have rendered my prepared arguments incomplete." He gestured to the holographic display. "I asked the Council to review Incident 7413. The display showed a mining station in the Kelthos sector. Warning lights flashed across every screen as a human male moved through corridors filled with toxic gas. Structural engineer Hiro Takahashi," Velmon narrated. "When an explosion ruptured containment on mining station Perseverance 7, standard protocol required sealing the affected sections and evacuating remaining sectors. 347 workers were trapped in the damaged area. Protocol calculated their loss as acceptable." Thexera heard the catch in Velmon's voice. The prosecutor was struggling. Engineer Takahashi refused evacuation. He entered the contaminated zone wearing an emergency atmosphere suit rated for 20 minutes of exposure. He remained for 73 minutes. The recording showed Hiro moving through the toxic environment, his hands working rapidly to reroute power, seal breaches and bypass damaged systems. His suit's integrity warnings blared constantly. He manually sealed 14 critical breaches, rerouted emergency power to 7 shelter stations, and activated 12 independent life support backup systems that our automatic safety measures had actually disabled as damaged beyond operational parameters. "They weren't damaged beyond use," Zara interjected quietly. "They were just damaged beyond safe use according to Council standards." "Which is different." "Yes," Velmon said, surprising everyone. "That appears to be the case. Engineer Takahashi saved 347 lives by using equipment we had classified as too dangerous to operate. His suit failed completely 6 minutes before he exited the contaminated zone. He suffered severe radiation exposure and chemical burns. He is currently in medical care and expected to fully recover." "Expected to recover?" Primac sounded shocked. "After 73 minutes in that environment?" "Human biology is remarkably resilient," Dr. Moltes admitted grudgingly. "They evolved on a world with fluctuating radiation levels, diverse chemical exposures and constant environmental stressors. What would kill most Council species merely requires intensive medical treatment for humans." "That's not the point," Velmon continued. "The point is that a human engineer evaluated our safety protocols, determined they would result in catastrophic loss of life, and chose to violate them. And he was correct. This is the second time in 12 hours you've acknowledged human judgment was superior to Council protocols," Vasek observed. "Prosecutor, are you feeling well?" "No, High Chancellor, I am not." Velmon's 6 eyes focused simultaneously on Vasek, an impressive display of his species' capacity for directed attention. "I am feeling that perhaps we are prosecuting the wrong entity. We charge Captain Okonkwo with violations of Council law. But perhaps we should be charging Council law with violations of common sense." The chamber erupted. Half the Council members shouted in outrage while the other half sat in stunned silence. "Order." Vasek's 3 voices harmonized in a command tone that shook the chamber. "Prosecutor Velmon, that statement borders on sedition." "Does it? Then let me present Incidents 7414 and 7415, both occurring during our recess." The display split, showing 2 more emergency scenarios. In the first, a human medical officer named Dr. Amara Alyamide treated patients during a disease outbreak using medications that were technically expired by our standards but still clinically effective. Council protocols would have withheld treatment pending delivery of fresh supplies, a process requiring 6 hours. The patients had less than 2 hours. Dr. Alyamide saved 43 lives. "And the second incident?" Threnanael asked. A human cargo ship captain named Liu Xiaoying detected an unregistered distress beacon in a restricted zone. Council regulations prohibit unauthorized entry into restricted zones under any circumstances. Captain Liu ignored this restriction, entered the zone, and rescued a Velmoran research team whose ship had suffered catastrophic failure. They would have died within the hour. Thexera felt her respiratory systems freeze. "Velmoran researchers?" "Yes, Ambassador. From your own sovereignty. The research team leader was your cousin, Dr. Thexiro." The chamber fell absolutely silent. Thexera's compound eyes struggled to focus as the weight of that information settled on her. Her cousin Thexiro, brilliant, dedicated Thexiro, had been saved by a human who broke the law to do it. How long would proper authorization for zone entry have required? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. 14 hours minimum, Velmon replied. The research team had 40 minutes of life support remaining when Captain Liu found them. Thexera stood slowly. Every eye in the chamber fixed on her. I spoke with my cousin this morning. She contacted me to express gratitude to a Captain Liu Xiaoying, though I confess I did not understand the context at the time. She is alive because a human broke our laws. Yes, Velmon said simply. And you're prosecuting Captain Okonkwo for the same type of violation? Yes. Then I formally request this prosecution be terminated immediately. Ambassador Thexera, Vasek began gently, your personal gratitude is understandable, but it cannot override legal proceedings. This isn't about gratitude. Thexera's voice rose, her mandibles clicking in agitation. This is about the fundamental absurdity of a legal system that makes rescuing people illegal. We have created a civilization where following the law can require letting people die. How is that civilized? Admiral Kwame stood, his expression grave. High Chancellor, I request permission to present a human perspective on this matter. Granted. Humans have a saying, hard cases make bad law. It means that when you try to create rules that cover every possible scenario, you inevitably create rules that fail in specific circumstances. You, the Council, have spent 12,000 years trying to eliminate all uncertainty, all ambiguity, all risk from your civilization. But you can't. Reality is messy. Crises are unpredictable. And sometimes the right thing to do is going to violate somebody's carefully written protocol. So you advocate chaos? Primax asked, though his tone lacked its earlier certainty. No. We advocate judgment. The wisdom to know when the rule serves its purpose and when it becomes an obstacle to that purpose. You've created a system that removes judgment from the equation. You've made following procedure more important than thinking about why the procedure exists. Zara spoke up from her holding area. Can I tell you guys something my grandmother used to say? She was a farmer on Earth, grew crops in tough conditions. She always said, rules are like fences. Good ones help you know where you can safely go. Bad ones just keep you trapped. That's actually quite profound, Threnanael said. Your grandmother was wise, Captain. She was, yeah. And she taught me that you have to know which fences to climb over when someone needs help on the other side. Counselor Zephyrim activated his display again. I have more data. In the past 23 months, there have been 1,783 situations where both Council responders and humans were present at emergency scenarios. In 100% of cases where humans violated protocols, survival outcomes improved measurably. In the 42% of cases where Council responders prevented humans from violating protocols, outcomes were significantly worse. You're saying humans should be allowed to simply ignore our laws? Vasek asked. I'm saying, Zephyrim replied carefully, that we may need to reconsider what purpose our laws serve. Are they meant to maintain order? Or are they meant to protect lives? Because the data suggests we have optimized for the former at the expense of the latter. The High Chancellor's skin cycled through complex color patterns that Thexera's translator struggled to interpret. Finally he spoke. This council will take a full-day recess. We have much to consider. Captain Okonkwo, you are released to Admiral Adeyemi's supervision pending our final determination. We will reconvene tomorrow for a final verdict. As the chamber emptied, Thexera approached Zara and Kwame. Captain, I owe you thanks. Captain Liu saved my cousin's life. She did what anyone would do, Zara said with a shrug. No, Thexera replied. She did what any human would do. The rest of us would have followed procedure and let them die. The weight of that statement hung in the air between them. Zara smiled sadly. Then maybe it's time to change your procedures. The verdict approaches. The sixth day brought unexpected visitors to the council station. Thexera watched through observation windows as ships from every corner of council space arrived unannounced, their transponders identifying them as private vessels, merchant ships and independent operators. High Chancellor, her aide reported nervously, we have over 300 unscheduled arrivals requesting permission to address the council regarding Captain Okonkwo's case. Vasek's skin colors cycled to shades Thexera had never seen before. 300? On whose authority? No authority, sir. They came on their own. They're requesting permission to testify. The morning session opened to a packed gallery. Vasek surveyed the assembled crowd with obvious bewilderment. Will someone explain this unprecedented gathering? I transmitted a distress call and prepared to enter emergency stasis, expecting rescue within the standard 48-hour response time. She gestured to a human male in the gallery. Instead, Captain Marcus Chin of the human vessel Distant Hope arrived within 3 hours. He had picked up my distress call and diverted course, a violation of his company's routing protocols and council traffic regulations. His actions saved my life and my cargo. Another figure stood, a Chromolite medical officer. I am Dr. Severin of Medical Station Altair 9. During an outbreak of Delarian fever, our standard treatment protocols were failing. Human Dr. Sarah Kamani ignored our procedures and implemented a combination therapy from human medical databases that had not been approved for use on non-human species. She saved 87 patients who would have died under standard care. One by one, individuals stood. Each told a story of humans violating protocols, breaking regulations, ignoring procedures, and saving lives. Thexera watched Prosecutor Velmon's expressions cycle through disbelief, frustration, and finally something that looked like resignation. "High Chancellor," he said quietly when the testimonies finally ended, "I request permission to withdraw all charges against Captain Okonkwo." "On what grounds?" Bosik asked. "On the grounds that I can no longer in good conscience prosecute someone for actions that have been demonstrated to serve the very purpose our laws are meant to serve, the protection of life and the promotion of well-being. If our regulations prevent these outcomes, then our regulations are flawed, not the humans who violate them." "Prosecutor Velmon," Primax interjected, his synthetic voice sharp, "you cannot simply abandon the rule of law because of emotional testimonies. These aren't emotional testimonies. They're data points. Each represents a scenario where human judgment exceeded our institutional protocols. And there are hundreds of them. At what point do we acknowledge the pattern?" Dr. Molta stood, his feathers agitated. "I maintain that human behavior represents a psychological aberration. Their inability to accept proper authority, their compulsion to act rather than follow established procedures. These are not virtues, they are symptoms of a disordered cognition." "Doctor," Admiral Kwame said calmly, "let me ask you something. How many emergencies has your species personally managed in the last century?" "I am a psychologist, not an emergency responder." "Exactly. Humans are an emergency response species. We evolved on a planet that threw disasters at us constantly: earthquakes, hurricanes, predators, disease, famine. The humans who survived were the ones who could assess a situation quickly and act decisively, even without perfect information. You call that disordered cognition. We call it adaptive survival. Survival is not the sole measure of civilization." Moldes protested. "No," Counselor Threnail interjected, "but it is the foundation upon which civilization is built. Perhaps we have been so long removed from existential threats that we have forgotten this basic truth." Zara spoke from her position next to Kwame. "Can I ask you all something? What do you think civilization is for?" "To maintain order and promote the collective good," Primax responded automatically. "Okay, but what's the point of order? What's the collective good?" The question hung in the air. Several counselors opened their mouths, then closed them again, struggling to articulate something that suddenly seemed less obvious than it should be. "The point of order," Thexera found herself saying, "is to enable beings to live safe, fulfilling lives. The collective good means ensuring the well-being of all members of society." "Right," Zara said. "So if your order prevents safety and your procedures harm well-being, then they're not serving civilization, they're just serving themselves. You've got a system that's more interested in perpetuating itself than in doing what it's supposed to do." "That's an oversimplification," Vosik said, but his skin color suggested uncertainty. "Maybe. But sometimes the simple answer is the right one. You guys have made things really complicated because you've been adding rules for 12,000 years. Every time something went wrong, you added a new rule to prevent it from happening again. But you never took any rules away. So now you've got so many rules that they contradict each other, and nobody can actually follow all of them, and the only way to do the right thing is to break the rules." Counselor Zephyrim activated his analysis display. "I have been modeling this hypothesis. Captain Okonkwo's description aligns with what systems theorists call institutional sclerosis, when an organization becomes so rigid that it loses the ability to adapt to new circumstances. The Council's regulatory framework has grown by an average of 0.3% per standard year for the past 12,000 years. That represents a compound increase of approximately," he paused, recalculating, "36,482%. Our legal code is 300 times larger than it was at founding?" Vosik asked, his three voices discordant with shock. "Yes. And human presence has exposed the dysfunction this creates. They are not the problem. They are the stress test that revealed our system's failures. A long silence followed. Thexera could practically hear the weight of institutional assumptions crumbling across the chamber. Finally Vasek spoke. I believe this council requires more time to deliberate on matters far larger than Captain Okonkwo's individual case. However, I will not keep her in custody while we wrestle with 12,000 years of accumulated dysfunction. He turned to face Zara directly. Captain Okonkwo, this council formally dismisses all charges against you. You are free to return to your ship and your cargo of overripe Belizean fruit. Zara broke into a huge smile. Thank you, High Chancellor. Though actually, I sold the fruit to a station merchant yesterday. The overripe ones make really good fruit wine apparently. You violated your holding custody to conduct business? Well yeah. The fruit was going to waste otherwise. That would have been a shame. For a moment, Thexera thought Vasek might reinstate all charges. Instead, the High Chancellor's skin colors cycled to something that might have been amusement. Of course you did. You are dismissed, Captain. Please try not to break any regulations on your way out of the station. I'll do my best, Zara promised in a tone that suggested she absolutely would not. The new framework. 3 months later, Thexera stood before an emergency session of the Galactic Council. But this time she was not attending as an observer. She had been appointed to chair the newly formed Commission on Regulatory Reform, a body that would have been unthinkable before the Okonkwo incident, as it was now known. Esteemed councillors, she began, the Commission has completed its preliminary review of Council regulations. Our findings are extensive. The holographic display illuminated, showing a cascade of data that made even Councillor Zephram's quantum-linked neural network strain to process. We have identified approximately 230,000 regulations that directly contradict other regulations. We have found 78,000 protocols that require impossible conditions to fulfill. And we have documented over 1 million procedures that prioritize institutional preservation over the lives and well-being of citizens. The chamber sat in stunned silence. The Commission recommends a complete regulatory restructure based on what humans call the common sense principle. All regulations must serve a clear, articulable purpose directly connected to citizen well-being. All protocols must include provisions for emergency deviation. And all procedures must be reviewable by individuals on the ground facing actual circumstances. You're proposing we give individuals the authority to override council directives? Primax asked, though his tone was more curious than hostile now. I'm proposing we give individuals the responsibility to think, Thexera replied. Humans have taught us that judgment cannot be automated, and discretion cannot be regulated away. Sometimes the right thing to do will violate the written rule. Our system must acknowledge this reality rather than pretend it doesn't exist. Admiral Kwame stood in the gallery. If I may, High Chancellor, I'd like to introduce a proposal from the human delegation. Proceed. We call it the Emergency Discretion Protocol. In any crisis scenario where immediate action is required and standard procedures would result in preventable harm, any individual present is authorized to take necessary action, provided they document their reasoning afterward. This doesn't eliminate accountability, it just prioritizes saving lives over paperwork. You're suggesting we legalize the very behavior we were prosecuting? Belmont asked. We're suggesting you acknowledge that behavior was always the right thing to do and update your laws accordingly, Kwame replied. Dr. Moltes stood, his feathers less ruffled than in previous sessions. I must admit, my analysis of human psychology was incomplete. What I termed pathology is actually a highly adaptive cognitive framework. Their action bias is not inability to accept proper authority, it is prioritization of observed reality over abstract hierarchy. Their crisis decision patterns are not reckless, they represent sophisticated rapid assessment protocols evolved over millions of years. Are you saying, Vasek asked carefully, that humans are actually better at crisis management than we are? I'm saying they're adapted for it in ways we are not. And rather than treating this as a flaw to be corrected, we should recognize it as a capability to be integrated into council operations. Councillor Threnenel spoke, her ancient voice carrying weight that silenced all other discussion. 12,000 years ago, our ancestors founded this council on a simple principle, that cooperation served all species better than conflict. We have grown from that foundation into a magnificent civilization. But we have also grown rigid. We have ossified. The humans' arrival has been painful because they exposed fractures we did not want to see. She paused, her gaze sweeping the chamber. We can respond to this exposure in two ways. We can reject the humans and their uncomfortable truths, or we can accept that civilization is not a destination but a journey, and that even 12,000 years of tradition must sometimes evolve. You support these reforms? Primax asked. I do. Because the alternative is to become the very thing we built the council to prevent, a rigid, authoritarian system that values its own perpetuation over the beings it was meant to serve. The vote was called. Thexera watched as the holographic displays tallied results. It wasn't unanimous, change on this scale never was, but it was decisive. The reforms passed. As the session adjourned, Thexera found herself approached by an unlikely delegation: Velmon, Moltus and Primax. Ambassador, Velmon said, his 6 eyes focused with unusual intensity, I spent my entire career believing that law was paramount. The humans taught me that law is merely a tool. A tool that must serve justice, not the other way around. I diagnosed them as disordered, Moltus added, when in truth they were simply different. Their psychology is adapted for chaos and crisis in ways ours is not. That is not weakness. It is diversity. Primax's synthetic voice held a quality Thexera had never heard before, something almost like humility. I believed that order was the highest good. But the humans showed me that order without purpose is just sterility. Civilization must serve life, not regulate it into stillness. What made you change your minds? Thexera asked. Data, Zephyrim said, joining their group. In the 3 months since Captain Okonkwo's trial, I have been tracking human interactions with council systems. Emergency response times have decreased by 48% in sectors with human presence. Innovation rates have increased by 73%. Citizen satisfaction scores have risen by 32%. The humans are not disrupting our civilization, they are revitalizing it. Thexera's communicator chimed. A message from Captain Zara Okonkwo, heard about the vote. Congratulations. Does this mean I can stop getting yelled at for saving people? She composed a response. It means we're trying to build a civilization that doesn't require heroism just to do the right thing. But knowing you, you'll find ways to be heroic anyway. The reply came quickly, probably. See you at the next emergency session. Thexera clicked her mandibles in what humans would recognize as laughter. 6 months ago, she would have been horrified by such irreverence. Now she found it refreshing. Admiral Kwame approached with a human female Thexera didn't recognize. Ambassador, I'd like you to meet Captain Lu Xiaoying, the human who had saved her cousin. Thexera bowed in her species' traditional gesture of profound gratitude. Captain Lu, my family owes you an irredeemable debt. No debt, Lu said with a smile. I was in the neighborhood, someone needed help, I helped. That's just basic human stuff. That's the point, isn't it? Thexera mused. What you call basic human stuff? We had regulated into impossibility. You reminded us that complexity should serve simplicity, not replace it. Counselor Threnanael joined their gathering. The humans have given us a great gift, she said. Not just their crisis management capabilities but something more fundamental. They have reminded us what civilization is actually for. What's that? Kwame asked. To enable beings to live, to thrive, to help each other when help is needed. We had become so focused on maintaining our systems that we forgot the systems were meant to maintain us. Vasek approached, his skin colors cycling through shades of contentment. Ambassador Thexera, your commission has challenging work ahead. Restructuring 12,000 years of accumulated regulation will take decades. Yes, Thexera agreed. But we'll have help. I'm appointing several human liaisons to the commission. People who understand that sometimes you have to break the rules to do the right thing. I recommend Captain Okonkwo, Vasek said. Anyone who can make a functioning navigation beacon out of entertainment system parts might have useful insights into regulatory simplification. She's actually already agreed, Thexera said. Along with Captains Chin, Lu and Malhotra, Engineer Takahashi and Dr. Kamani. They're assembling what they call a common-sense task force. That sounds delightfully chaotic, Threnanael observed. It does, doesn't it? Thexera's mandibles clicked in amusement. But that's rather the point. We need chaos. Controlled, purposeful chaos. The kind that questions assumptions, that asks, why instead of just, how, that remembers that all these rules exist to serve beings, not the other way around. As the council members dispersed, Thexera stood at the observation window, watching ships depart the station. Among them was the Wandering Star, Zara's transport vessel. Its trajectory showed a minor deviation from standard departure vectors. probably to check on a flagged sensor reading that regulations would classify as non-critical. 3 months ago, Thexera would have reported such a deviation. Now, she simply made a note to follow up and ensure whatever Zara had spotted was addressed. Because that was the real lesson the humans had taught them. Civilization wasn't about creating perfect systems that never failed. It was about creating flexible systems that could adapt when they inevitably did fail. It was about trusting individuals to think, to assess, to act with judgment and compassion rather than blind adherence to protocol. The humans hadn't brought chaos to the Galactic Council. They had brought something far more valuable, the reminder that order must serve life, not the other way around. And sometimes, the most civilized thing you could do was break the rules to save someone. Thexera turned from the window, mandibles clicking with satisfaction. There was work to do, decades of work, rebuilding legal frameworks that had calcified over millennia. It would be difficult. It would be controversial. It would undoubtedly generate thousands more incident reports. But for the first time in her 4 centuries of service, Thexera felt like the Galactic Council was actually building something worth having. Not just a civilization of order, but a civilization of purpose. And it only took a human shooting a navigation beacon to teach them the difference.